If you sign that, you won't notice the mistake until it's already cost you everything, she said softly, just as the pen touched the paper, and for a fraction of a second, no one moved. The rain pressed harder against the tall glass windows of the Manhattan restaurant, blurring the skyline into streaks of silver and gray, while inside, the air was warm, controlled, expensive, just like everything Jonathan Reed preferred. He sat at the center of the table, navy suit sharp, cufflinks catching the light, a man used to decisions that shaped companies and futures in minutes. Around him, advisors leaned in with quiet confidence, leather folders open, voices low but certain. The contract had been reviewed, revised, approved. Every number aligned. Every clause accounted for. This was routine. This was power. And then there was her. Emily Carter stood just behind his right shoulder, a coffee pot in hand, her presence almost invisible. Just another waitress in a black uniform, moving silently between conversations that were never meant for her. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look at him. She looked at the page. The slight crease near the bottom. The way one number didn't sit right against the rest. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't supposed to be. Jonathan didn't even turn at first. People spoke to him all the time. Assistants. Executives. Strangers trying to be heard. But something about the way she said it, not louder, not sharper, just certain, made the room hesitate. One of the lawyers let out a small, polite chuckle. "I'm sure everything here has been thoroughly checked," he said, not unkind, but dismissive. Another voice followed, agreeing, reinforcing, smoothing over the interruption like it had never happened. Emily didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply reached forward, careful, respectful, and placed the coffee cup down beside Jonathan's hand, her finger pausing for just a second over a single line buried in dense legal text. "Right there," she said quietly. Jonathan's jaw tightened, irritation flickering beneath his calm exterior. He didn't like being interrupted. Especially not now. Especially not by someone who wasn't part of the conversation. But, still, his eyes followed where she pointed. Just briefly, just to dismiss it. The number looked correct at first glance. It matched the summary above. It aligned with the projections. But something about the structure, how it connected to the clause above it, felt off. Subtle. Easy to miss. The kind of detail no one questions because everyone assumes someone else already has. The room shifted slightly. Chairs creaked. Someone cleared their throat. Jonathan leaned back just enough to take a second look, this time slower. The rain outside grew louder, or maybe everything inside had gone quieter. He traced the line again, then the one above it, then back. A small inconsistency. A percentage tied to a condition that didn't exist anywhere else in the agreement. Harmless at a glance. Expensive if triggered. Very expensive. The pen in his hand hovered. No one spoke now. Not the lawyers. Not the advisors. Not even the man across the table who had been smiling just moments before. Jonathan set the pen down. Slowly. Deliberately. For the first time since she spoke, he looked at her. Really looked. Not at the uniform. Not at the role. At her. Emily didn't meet his gaze. She simply stepped back, hands steady, expression calm, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And in that silence, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that everyone in the room felt it. The decision hadn't been made yet, but it was no longer the same decision. No one rushed to speak, because in rooms like this, silence always meant something had gone wrong. Jonathan Reed leaned forward again, slower this time, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the contract, as if the paper itself had changed weight. Across from him, the opposing executive adjusted his tie, a practiced movement meant to project calm, but the timing was just a second too late. The lawyers who had been so certain moments ago now avoided direct eye contact, flipping pages they had already reviewed, searching for something they could explain, something they could control. Jonathan did not ask a question. He did not need to. He simply pointed to the line Emily had indicated, his voice even, measured. "Walk me through this clause again." It was not a request. One of the senior attorneys cleared his throat, leaning in with a tight smile. "Of course. It is a standard conditional percentage adjustment based on projected quarterly performance." His tone was confident, but thinner now, stretched just enough to reveal strain. Jonathan did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the page. "And the condition that triggers it," he said, "where is it defined?" A pause. Brief. almost invisible. Papers shifted again. Another attorney leaned closer, scanning, tracing, flipping back a page, then another. The room felt smaller. The rain outside continued, steady, indifferent. Emily moved quietly to the side, refilling a water glass that did not need refilling, her movements smooth, unhurried, as if she had already stepped out of the moment everyone else was still trapped in. She did not watch them. She did not need to. Jonathan exhaled slowly through his nose, then tapped the paper once. "It is not defined," he said. "Not louder, not sharper, just final." The opposing executive opened his mouth, then closed it again, recalculating in real time. "It is implied within the broader framework of the agreement," he offered, carefully, choosing each word as if it might be examined later. Jonathan finally looked up, and this time his expression was not irritation. It was clarity. "Implied terms do not control millions of dollars in exposure," he said. The sentence landed clean. No emotion, just truth. One of his advisors shifted in his seat. "We can amend that language before final execution," he suggested quickly, eager to restore momentum. But Jonathan shook his head once. "Small. Controlled. If we missed this," he said, "what else did we assume was safe because everyone else nodded first?" No one answered. Because everyone understood. It was never just about the one line. It was about the room, the assumptions, the quiet agreement that had replaced actual scrutiny. Jonathan picked up the pen again, then set it down a second time, this time with intention. The decision was already made. "We are not signing this today," he said. Across the table, the smile disappeared completely. "Mr. Reed, we have investors waiting on this approval." The executive pressed, more urgency now, less polish. Jonathan stood, adjusting his jacket with the same calm precision he had when he first sat down. "Then they can wait for a deal that does not rely on what people failed to notice." He turned slightly, his gaze shifting once more, not to the lawyers, not to the executive, but to Emily. She was already stepping back, already returning to the rhythm of the room as if nothing had happened. But this time, he did not look past her. This time, he saw her. And for the first time that day, the most important decision in the room had not come from the loudest voice. It had come from the quietest one. The room did not recover immediately, because decisions like that did not just pause momentum, they exposed it. And as Jonathan Reed stepped away from the table, the weight of what almost happened lingered in the air heavier than the rain pressing against the windows. His advisors gathered their documents quickly, voices lowered now, no longer certain, no longer leading, while across the table the opposing executive forced a polite nod that did not reach his eyes. Business would continue, but not like before. Not with the same confidence. Jonathan walked past them without another word, his attention already shifting, not to the deal, not to the numbers, but to a detail he had not planned for. Emily Carter had already moved back into motion, clearing plates, refilling glasses, resetting the table for the next group as if nothing unusual had taken place. Her steps were steady, her posture composed, her presence once again blending into the background that everyone had accepted without question. Jonathan stopped a few feet away from her, just long enough to observe what he had missed earlier. It was not just that she noticed the clause. It was how she noticed it. No hesitation. No need for recognition. Just certainty, delivered at exactly the moment it mattered. "Emily," he said, reading her name from the small tag pinned neatly to her uniform. She turned, not startled, not eager, just attentive in the way someone trained to respond without assuming importance. "Yes, sir." Her tone was neutral, professional, unchanged by what had just happened. Jonathan studied her for a moment, not with suspicion, but with curiosity that he rarely allowed himself to show. "Where did you learn to read contracts like that?" It was a direct question, but not aggressive. It carried something quieter beneath it. Respect, perhaps, though he would not name it yet. Emily did not answer immediately. She glanced briefly at the table she had just cleared, aligning a fork with the edge of the plate before responding. "I notice patterns," she said simply. Not an explanation, not a defense, just a fact. Jonathan exhaled lightly, almost a quiet laugh, without sound. "That was more than a pattern," he said. "That was a liability buried where no one thought to look." Emily met his gaze for the first time, just for a second, and in that brief moment there was no challenge, no hesitation, only calm. "People trust summaries," she said. Details do not. The sentence landed the same way her earlier words had. Clean. Unforced. True. Around them, the restaurant returned to its rhythm. Conversations rising again, glasses clinking, the world continuing as if nothing significant had shifted, but Jonathan knew better. He had built his entire career on seeing what others overlooked, and yet today, in a room full of experts, it had not been him who saw first. You saved us from a very expensive mistake, he said, his voice quieter now, less formal, more precise. Emily shook her head slightly, already reaching for another glass to refill. I just pointed at something, she replied. You made the decision. Jonathan paused, considering that. The distinction mattered. Power always wanted to claim the moment, but truth rarely needed to. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement that did not draw attention but carried weight nonetheless. Still, he said, not everyone would have spoken. Emily's expression did not change. Not everyone is looking, she said. And with that, she turned back to her work, leaving Jonathan standing there for a second longer than he intended, realizing that for the first time in a long time, the most valuable insight in the room had not come from someone trying to prove their worth. It had come from someone who never needed to. The rain had slowed to a quiet drizzle by the time Jonathan Reed stepped outside, but the air still carried that same weight, the kind that lingers after something almost goes wrong. His driver opened the car door without a word, but Jonathan did not get in immediately. He stood there for a moment, looking back through the tall glass windows of the restaurant, his reflection faint against the warm light inside. From where he stood, Emily Carter was just another figure moving between tables, her outline blurred by distance and glass, already absorbed back into a world that rarely noticed her. And yet, she had shifted something that none of his executives, none of his advisors, none of his carefully selected experts had managed to catch. Jonathan slid into the back seat finally, adjusting his cuffs slightly as the door closed with a muted thud. Office, he said, his voice calm, but his mind was not on the office. It was on a single line of text, a single detail, a single moment that had interrupted certainty. The car moved smoothly through the wet streets, tires gliding over reflections of city lights stretched across the pavement, while Jonathan replayed the scene again and again, not the contract itself, but the sequence. The confidence, the agreement, the absence of doubt, and then her voice. Not loud, not urgent, just precise. He had built his reputation on precision, on seeing patterns before others recognized them, on making decisions faster because he saw clearer. But today, in a room designed for control, he had relied on the assumption that everything important had already been seen. That assumption had nearly cost him millions. Back at the office, the building was quieter than usual, the late afternoon fading into evening, most floors dimmed, the hum of work replaced by the softer rhythm of cleaning crews and distant elevator chimes. Jonathan walked straight to his office, setting the contract down on his desk with more care than he normally gave to documents he had already decided against. He did not sit right away. Instead, he stood there, looking at it, as if the paper might reveal something else if he gave it enough time. Then he pressed the intercom. Get me the full legal team. Now. His assistant's voice came back immediately, slightly surprised, but composed. Yes, Mr. Reed. Within minutes, the same advisors who had been so certain earlier were seated across from him again, though the environment had changed. There was no polished restaurant, no ambient music, no soft lighting. Just glass walls, a long table, and a document placed in the center like evidence. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He simply slid the contract forward. Explain to me how this was approved. The room shifted again, but this time there was no audience, no need to maintain appearances. Pages turned faster now. Voices overlapped slightly, trying to reconstruct the logic that had seemed so clear before. One attorney spoke about standard structures. Another mentioned time constraints. A third pointed to previous agreements that used similar language. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they sounded like something else. Assumption. Jonathan listened without interruption, his hands resting lightly on the table, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. You all agreed because everyone else agreed, he said. No one denied it. Because no one could. He let the silence settle for a moment, long enough for the realization to take hold. long enough for the discomfort to replace confidence. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. One person who was not even part of this process saw what all of you missed. He did not say her name. He did not need to. The contrast was already clear. The room felt smaller, not because of the walls, but because of what had just been exposed. Jonathan reached for the contract, closing it with a soft, final motion. From now on, he said, we do not move forward on anything that has not been questioned properly. It was not anger. It was standard. And standards, once raised, did not go back down. As the team filed out, quieter than when they entered, Jonathan remained seated, his attention drifting back to the restaurant, to a voice that had not tried to prove anything, and to a realization that stayed with him long after the room had emptied. Sometimes, the most dangerous mistake was not the one hidden in the details. It was the one hidden in the certainty that there were no details left to find. The office lights dimmed automatically as the evening stretched deeper into night, but Jonathan Reed did not notice, because his attention had already shifted somewhere else entirely. The contract was closed, the issue identified, the decision made, yet the moment itself refused to settle into something ordinary. It stayed sharp, clear, uncomfortable in the way truth often was. He stood near the window, looking out over the city, where traffic moved in quiet lines and distant headlights blurred into motion, each car carrying someone who believed they understood where they were going. Jonathan had always been one of those people. Direction had never been his problem. But clarity, he realized now, was something else entirely. He turned back toward his desk, pressing a button on the intercom again. I need information on an employee at the restaurant from earlier today, he said, his tone steady, not demanding, just precise. There was a brief pause on the other end, the kind that came from someone processing a request that did not fit the usual pattern. Of course, Mr. Reed. Do you have a name? He did not hesitate. Emily Carter. The name felt simple when he said it, almost too simple for the weight it carried now. Understood. I will have something for you shortly. Jonathan released the button and sat down finally, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the desk, not tapping, not restless, just waiting. He did not often wait for information. It usually came to him before he needed to ask. But this was different. This was not about risk or competition or acquisition. This was about understanding how someone outside his world had seen more clearly than everyone inside it. Minutes passed. Then the file arrived. Basic employment record. Shift schedule. Nothing unusual. Nothing that explained what he had seen. No advanced degree listed. No corporate experience. Just a line that said she had been working there for a little over a year. Jonathan read it twice, then a third time, not because it was complex, but because it was not. It did not match the moment. It did not match the precision. He leaned back slightly, exhaling as he set the file down. Incomplete, he said quietly to himself, not frustrated, just aware. Because information without context was just another version of assumption. And he had already seen where assumption led. Back across the city, the restaurant had begun to slow, the dinner rush fading into a quieter rhythm as tables cleared and chairs reset. Emily Carter moved through the space with the same steady pace she had maintained all day, her focus not on what had happened, but on what still needed to be done. She wiped down a table, aligned the silverware, folded a napkin with practiced precision. No one around her mentioned the contract. No one asked questions, because from their perspective, nothing had happened. A group had come in. They had eaten. They had left. The world had continued. Emily did not correct that perception. She did not need to. She had never worked for recognition. She worked because there was work to be done. One of her co-workers glanced at her briefly. Long day, he said casually, stacking plates onto a tray. Emily gave a small nod. They usually are. Her voice was calm, unremarkable, exactly what people expected. He shrugged, moving on, already thinking about closing time, about getting home, about everything that mattered outside this place. Emily finished setting the table and stepped back, her eyes scanning the room automatically, noticing what was out of place, what needed attention, what others had overlooked without realizing it. It was not something she turned on or off. It was just how she saw things. Later that night, as she stepped outside, the air was cooler, the rain gone, the streets reflecting the last traces of light from passing cars. She adjusted her coat slightly, beginning the familiar walk toward the subway, her thoughts quiet, undisturbed. For her, the day had not been about changing a decision. It had been about noticing something that did not belong and saying it before it was too late. Nothing more, nothing less. And somewhere across the city, a man who had built his life on control was beginning to understand that the most valuable perspective was often the one that did not try to control anything at all. The next morning arrived without ceremony, the city waking in its usual rhythm of movement and noise. But for Jonathan Reed, something had shifted in a way that routine could not smooth over. He sat at his desk earlier than usual, the skyline outside sharp and clear now, no rain to blur the edges, no distraction to soften what he had realized. The file on Emily Carter was still there, untouched since the night before, its simplicity almost deliberate, as if it refused to explain what mattered. Jonathan did not open it again. He already knew it would not give him what he was looking for. Instead, he reached for something else. A blank notepad. He wrote a single line across the top. What did she see that we did not? It was not a question about intelligence. It was a question about perspective. Across the office, his assistant stepped in quietly, placing a cup of coffee on his desk without interrupting. Jonathan nodded once, then spoke without looking up. Clear my afternoon. There was a slight pause. You have 3 scheduled meetings, Mr. Reed. Reschedule them. His tone was not impatient. It was final. Yes, Mr. Reed. The door closed again, leaving the room in silence. Jonathan leaned back slightly, considering something he had not done in years. Not a deal. Not a negotiation. A decision without immediate return. He stood, picked up his coat, and walked out before the office could pull him back into its usual gravity. The restaurant looked different in daylight. Less dramatic. Less controlled. The tall windows let in natural light that softened the edges of everything, revealing details that evening lighting had hidden. It was quieter now, only a few tables occupied, the low murmur of conversation replacing the intensity of the previous day. Jonathan stepped inside without announcement, without the presence of advisors or expectation. Just himself. Emily was there, moving between tables, her pace the same as before, steady, focused, unremarkable. To anyone who did not know what to look for, he watched for a moment, not approaching immediately. This time, he observed the details. The way she adjusted a misplaced glass before anyone noticed. The way her eyes scanned a table in a single glance, taking in what others would need minutes to process. It was not just attention. It was awareness. When she finally turned and saw him, there was no surprise, no visible reaction, just the same calm acknowledgement as before. Good morning, she said. Jonathan nodded slightly. Do you have a moment? She glanced at the table she was serving, then back at him. I can take a short break. Her tone made it clear that time was something she managed carefully. They sat at a small table near the window, away from the center of the room. No audience. No pressure. Just 2 people from very different worlds sharing the same space. Jonathan rested his hands lightly on the table, not asserting, not performing, just present. Yesterday, he began, then paused, choosing his words more carefully than usual. You saw something no one else did. Emily did not respond immediately. She looked at the window for a second, then back at him. I saw something that did not match, she said. Jonathan nodded once. Why did you say something? It was a simple question, but it carried more weight than it seemed. Emily's answer came just as simply. Because you were about to act on it. No hesitation. No attempt to impress. Just clarity. Jonathan studied her for a moment, recognizing something familiar in that response. Not ambition. Not strategy. Responsibility. The kind that did not come from a title, but from awareness. Most people would have stayed quiet, he said. Emily gave a small shrug. Most people are not paying attention, she replied. The words settled between them, not confrontational, just honest. Jonathan leaned back slightly, a faint shift in his expression, something closer to understanding than curiosity now. I would like to offer you an opportunity, he said, his voice even, controlled, but different from before. Not a test. Not a challenge. A genuine shift. Emily did not react immediately. She simply waited, as if she already understood that what mattered was not the offer itself, but what it represented. And for the first time, Jonathan realized that this conversation was not about bringing her into his world. It was about recognizing that her way of seeing the world had already proven something his had missed. Jonathan did not rush the moment. because for the first time in a long time, he understood that timing was not something to control, it was something to respect, and Emily Carter was not someone who responded to pressure. She simply sat across from him, hands resting lightly on the table, her posture relaxed but attentive, as if she had already decided that whatever came next would not change who she was. Jonathan studied her for a second longer, then continued, his voice steady, without the edge of authority he usually carried. "I want you to come work for me," he said. The words were direct, but the tone was different, not transactional, not persuasive, just honest. Around them, the quiet rhythm of the restaurant continued, cups set down, soft conversations rising and falling, a world moving without noticing that something significant had just been said. Emily did not react immediately. She did not lean forward, did not show surprise, did not ask what most people would ask first. She simply looked at him, measuring the intention behind the words rather than the offer itself. "Doing what?" she asked. Jonathan allowed a faint shift in his expression, something close to respect. It was the right question. Not about salary, not about status, about purpose. "Helping me see what others miss," he said. There was no exaggeration in it, no attempt to impress, just a clear acknowledgement of what had already happened. Emily considered that for a moment, her gaze drifting briefly toward the window where morning light reflected softly off passing cars, then back to him. "You already have people for that," she said. It was not a challenge. It was a fact. Jonathan nodded once. "I thought I did." The honesty in that sentence changed the space between them more than anything else could have. Emily tilted her head slightly, studying him now with the same quiet attention he had noticed before. "And now," she said. Jonathan did not hesitate. "Now I know the difference between people who review and people who notice." The distinction settled clearly, without defensiveness, without ego. Emily's expression remained calm, but there was a subtle shift, a recognition that he was not speaking from position anymore, but from realization. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands together, not closing off, just creating space to think. "What happens when I notice something you do not like?" she asked. The question was simple, but it cut deeper than the offer itself. Jonathan's response came just as simply. "Then I listen." No hesitation, no qualification, just a standard. Emily held his gaze for a moment longer, as if testing the weight of that answer, then nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "Most people say that," she said quietly, "until they hear something that changes their plans." Jonathan allowed a small breath, almost a reflection of something he would have denied before. "Yesterday changed mine," he replied. The sentence did not need anything added to it. It was enough. Around them, the restaurant manager glanced over briefly, noticing the extended conversation, but said nothing, trusting Emily's judgment without fully understanding why. Emily shifted her attention back to the table, her fingers tracing the edge of a folded napkin absent-mindedly, not nervous, just thinking. "I am not looking for a different job," she said finally. "I am already working." Jonathan nodded, not surprised, because he had already realized that she was not someone motivated by offers alone. "I am not offering you a job," he said. "I am offering you a different kind of responsibility." Emily's eyes lifted again, this time with a slight change, not interest, not hesitation, something quieter. Consideration. Because responsibility was not something she ignored. It was something she recognized. And in that moment, Jonathan understood that whatever decision she made next would not be based on what he could give her, but on whether she believed it was something worth noticing. Emily did not answer right away, because responsibility was not something she accepted quickly. It was something she examined, turned over, and tested against what she already knew to be true. The restaurant continued around them, unchanged, plates carried, orders called, small details managed by people who did not realize how much they relied on patterns they never questioned. She watched one of her coworkers walk past with a tray slightly tilted, not enough to cause a problem, but enough to suggest it might if left uncorrected, and without thinking, she reached out and steadied it before it shifted further. A small action, quiet, unnoticed by everyone except the one person sitting across from her. Jonathan Reed followed the movement, not because it was dramatic, but because it was consistent. She did not turn her awareness on and off. It was always there. "If I say yes," she said finally, her voice even, her attention returning to him, What changes? Jonathan considered that for a moment, not rushing to fill the space with something persuasive. You will be in rooms like the one yesterday, he said. But this time, you will be expected to speak. Emily held his gaze, not intimidated, not impressed, just steady. And if I say something people do not want to hear? Jonathan did not look away. Then it is probably what they need to hear. The answer came without hesitation, but not without understanding. Emily leaned back slightly, her fingers resting lightly against the table as she processed that. That sounds simple, she said quietly. It is not. Jonathan allowed a small shift in his expression, something closer to agreement than correction. No, he said. It is not. A brief silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just real, the kind that allowed truth to exist without being pushed. Emily glanced toward the window again, watching a car slow at the intersection, hesitate for a second, then move forward once the path was clear. Decision, timing, awareness. It was the same everywhere, just at different scales. People in your world, she said, turning back to him. They move fast. Jonathan nodded once. They have to. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in focus. And they assume speed means they are right. Jonathan did not interrupt, because she was not wrong. Sometimes, he said. Emily gave a small shake of her head. Speed does not make something correct, she said. It just makes the mistake happen faster. The sentence landed with the same quiet precision as everything she had said before. Jonathan exhaled lightly, not disagreeing, not defending, just recognizing. That is why I am here, he said. Emily studied him for a moment longer, as if measuring whether his understanding would hold once he returned to his world, where pressure, expectation, and habit shaped decisions more than intention did. If I come, she said slowly, choosing each word with care, I do not want to become part of that. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, not to assert, but to meet her at the level of the conversation. Then do not, he said. Change it. The simplicity of the statement could have sounded unrealistic, but his tone did not carry illusion. It carried responsibility. Emily held his gaze, and for the first time, there was a faint shift in her expression, not agreement, not refusal, something quieter. Possibility. She looked down at the table, then at her hands, then back at the room she knew, the patterns she had learned, the details she understood without effort. This place had never asked her to explain what she saw. It had never required her to challenge it. It had simply allowed her to notice. I will think about it, she said finally. Jonathan nodded once, not pushing further, because he understood that this was not a negotiation. It was a decision that had to come from the same place her observations did. Quiet, certain, unforced. He stood, adjusting his jacket, the movement familiar, but the moment different. That is all I ask, he said. Emily gave a small nod in return, already rising to return to her work, already stepping back into the rhythm that had never needed recognition to function. And as Jonathan walked toward the door, he realized that for once, the most important outcome was not whether she accepted, but whether she believed it was worth stepping into a world that had just learned how much it had been missing. The day did not end with an answer, because some decisions were not meant to be made in the same moment they were offered, and Emily Carter understood that better than most. The restaurant carried on through the afternoon, the steady rhythm of service filling the space with familiar motion. But something subtle had shifted beneath it, not in the room, not in the people around her, but in the question that now followed her thoughts. She moved as she always did, precise, attentive, noticing the small things others overlooked, a glass slightly out of alignment, a receipt placed just off-center, a customer hesitating before speaking, each detail registering without effort, each one corrected before it became a problem. It was not something she tried to do. It was simply how she saw. By the time her shift ended, the light outside had softened again, the sharp edges of morning giving way to the quieter tones of early evening. She stepped outside, pausing for a moment near the entrance, the city moving around her in its usual patterns, people passing by with purpose, cars stopping and starting in controlled bursts, everything following a system that worked until it did not. She adjusted her coat and began walking, not toward a decision, but toward clarity. Across the city, Jonathan Reed sat alone in his office again, the skyline stretching out in front of him, but this time he was not reviewing contracts or preparing for meetings. He was waiting. Not for a report. Not for confirmation. For something less predictable. He had made offers before. Many of them. Each one calculated, structured, expected to lead somewhere specific. This was not like that. This time, the outcome depended on someone who did not respond to pressure, someone who did not measure value the same way he had always measured it. He leaned back slightly, his reflection faint in the glass, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed uncertainty to exist without trying to control it. The next morning came quietly, the kind of start that did not announce itself but arrived steadily, like something that had already been decided before anyone noticed. The restaurant opened as it always did, chairs set, tables arranged, the first. Customers arriving without knowing they were stepping into a place where something had already shifted. Emily was there early, her routine unchanged, her movements as precise as ever, but her focus carried something new beneath it, not distraction, not hesitation, just awareness of a different possibility. She finished setting a table, stepped back, and looked at it for a moment longer than usual, not because something was wrong, but because she was considering something that had not been there before. Then she reached into her apron and pulled out a small piece of paper. A number. Nothing more. She had not looked at it since the day before. She did now. Not with urgency. Not with excitement. Just with the same calm attention she gave everything else. She folded it once, carefully, then placed it back. A decision was not a moment. It was a process. Later that afternoon, Jonathan's phone buzzed once on his desk, a single notification breaking the quiet. He looked at it. Not immediately, but with the same deliberate pace he had learned to respect. A message. No introduction. No explanation. Just a sentence. If I come, I do not adjust how I see things. He read it once, then again, the words settling into something clear and unambiguous. No negotiation. No conditions disguised as flexibility. Just a standard. Jonathan allowed a small, almost imperceptible shift in his expression, something that was not surprise, not relief, but recognition. He replied with a single line. That is exactly why you should. The message sent, the room returned to silence, but it was not the same silence as before. It was steadier, grounded, because this time, the decision had not been rushed, had not been influenced by pressure or expectation. It had come from the same place her observation had come from. And somewhere between a missed detail and a quiet voice that chose to speak, two different worlds had not just collided. They had adjusted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that